Americans for Prosperity is committed to breaking barriers across the country, and Americans for Prosperity is growing across North Dakota. By calling on lawmakers to reduce taxes, spend less, improve health care, and provide second chances, we can empower all North Dakotans to rise. We're fighting for you. Join us today so we can make North Dakota the best state to live, work, and raise a family. Americans for Prosperity paid for this ad. Superintendent Kirsten Baesler has been in the headlines recently for, something that nobody really wants to be in the headlines for. She was pulled over and arrested on suspicion of drunk driving. Superintendent Baesler, earlier today, as we record this on March 4th, issued a statement, and I'm going to read some of the statement here. And Superintendent Baesler joins me now on the podcast. Her statement reads, I quote, "A week ago, I made an extremely poor decision when I got into my vehicle and drove after drinking alcohol. I recognize even more clearly today how deeply I disappointed so many people. As a former teacher and lifelong learner, I understand that it is important to learn from your mistakes. To that end, I have decided to work with professional counselors in a formal treatment program to address my personal struggles regarding alcohol. I understand and appreciate the need for the state superintendent to be an example for the students she serves. This incident was certainly one of my worst moments, and I'm so sorry. It's important to me to set an example by taking responsibility for my actions with humility and to learn from my mistakes. And with the help of professionals, that is exactly what I intend to do with determination, humility, and hard work to make amends for my mistakes. I am asking for forgiveness and the grace needed to get back up and take on my life with dedication and joy." You end your statement with, "I ask that you please don't allow this mistake of mine to undo all the good work we have begun and all we have yet to accomplish together." Now, Kirsten, first of all, thank you so much for making your time. I know this is not an easy thing for you to talk about. Let me just start off by the clear from that statement is not only are you not resigning, you intend to continue your campaign for re-election. Is that correct?
Well, yes. Here's where I'm at. I have two priorities: my health and well-being, and then serving the students of North Dakota, along with their families and their teachers. So those are my two priorities. I enjoy what I do. I am completely committed to the mission of serving all children. I'm good at what I do, and we've been effective in our work at the Department of Public Instruction, and I want to keep doing it.
You mentioned just now that you want to serve two priorities, your own health and well-being and the students of North Dakota. What would you say to people who are saying, how do you serve one and the other? How do you get yourself well, struggling with... First of all, maybe we should ask this question. Do you feel like you're an alcoholic? Do you feel like you have an alcohol addiction?
That's a great and fair question, Rob, and with that, it might be a little longer answer, so just bear with me. So after, Thursday morning, the first thing that I did was, call my priest and engage with my faith, and before I even came to work that day. And so doing that, I should also back up and say that I've been part of the Al-Anon family community for a number of years, almost 15 years. And through that work, and I'm not just going to say just a kind of a cursory involvement, but engaged Al-Anon person, and I understood the importance of that network and the program that Al-Anon family members must work. And so step one of that, part of step one is my life has become unmanageable through this. And so as I recognized that, knew the support that AA and Al-Anon provided and does provide of a network of support and help within the Bismarck Mandan community, I engaged in that network on Friday at a new meeting. That weekend, as I'm sitting alone in my own head, in my own space, a person goes through a lot of different emotions and a lot of different voices and a lot of different scenarios and replays a lot of tapes in their head. And in that space, there's one part of my brain that analyzes like, okay, you replay the tape, and then there's this incident, and then there's that, and then there's this. And it's like, of course you are. And then the other part of your tape, the other part of your brain talks about all the things that happened during that same time frame. of that same, of those incidents. It's like I was able to really raise 3 wonderful young men that, I graduated from high school, graduated from college, went on to grad school, and continued, firefighter, serving their community, buying homes within North Dakota. And in the meantime, myself finishing my grad school and my master's program and leading Mandan through some very difficult, challenging times as a school board leader, then coming to the state and making some significant differences. And you try to connect those two. And it was really at that moment over the weekend when I was having those 2 scenarios play out in my head that I realized that I was not the person that could answer that question that you just asked me. Am I an alcoholic? Because number one, I'm trying to self-diagnose myself. I'm too close. I'm unbiased. And I'm within my own head. Having been, blessed enough, if you could look at it that way, to understand that there were people and organizations out there that are trained in this and professionals and do this for a living and can help me answer that question, I reached out to a foundation, to a group that is highly regarded internationally for their research that they do and the support that they provide and the program and the treatment that they provide to people in exactly these situations. And I scheduled an evaluation for myself. I did a 2-hour evaluation that asked me a lot of very hard questions. And as you can imagine, ask a lot of questions in different sort of ways to make sure that it's an honest, authentic evaluation. And one of the first questions that they asked me after they go through the height, the weight, and, any allergies, the whole medical background, is on a scale of 1 to 10, how committed are you to implementing the recommendation, whatever it is that results from this evaluation? 1 being, I'm not at all. I'm not going to do it at all. Someone's making me do this. To 5, I'll think about it and consider it. Or 10, I am 100% completely committed to implementing whatever the results of this evaluation are. Without even missing a beat, without even breathing, I knew my answer was 10. Sure. And so they did the evaluation. I just got yesterday I got the results. We went through that evaluation, and the recommendation that came from the results of that evaluation is that they didn't recommend that I was at a level or a point where I needed residential inpatient treatment. They didn't have that need for me. It's reserved for people that had begun treatment and had failed in other settings, had begun or tried and had different support efforts that didn't work or couldn't get themselves up to go to work at time, couldn't actually even care for themselves, or certainly couldn't cease the use of alcohol without medical monitoring. Though they weren't recommending that, they did believe that I would benefit from some sort of structured treatment program, outpatient treatment program, where I could really have the time working with professionals and counselors and in group settings and individual to really grasp the needs of the program and really understand what the program could offer and determine where I was at. So answer the question.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. To answer the question of, am I an alcoholic? Is this, where am I at on this? I don't know the answer to the question. And that's why I'm engaging the professionals to say, where am I at? And I know that a lot of people, may think that I've made this decision to appease the public or get out of trouble or deflect. And I have to just say that that's nothing further from the truth. It was very important for me to engage professionals in deciding what was best for me for the next steps. It's as important for me to engage those professionals in the counseling and that program to make sure that I know what's next best for me. I would never, ever, ever use this for a public or political reason. I have tremendous respect for those that are in recovery. And because of the family members that I know and love still to this day, that's a hard journey. And I would never, ever minimize their challenge or of the chronic, lifelong disease of alcoholism by just being flippant and saying, yes, I am, or no, I'm not, because I'm not qualified to make that decision alone.
There's a lot in what you just said to unpack. Let me start. When you say that you've been involved in the Al-Anon family for 15 years, I mean, have you been in recovery before, or is this what was the nature of that participation? So
Al-Anon is the group or organization, the support network for family members or those that love someone who is struggling with alcoholism.
I understand. I just wanted to clear that up. The other thing is, I just heard you. Obviously, recovery for everybody is a very personal thing. I think there's a lot of different paths to recovery. But I think the question that a lot of voters are going to be asking goes back to what I asked in the beginning: is what if you reckon you said at one point, step one in all this is recognizing that your life has become unmanageable. And then I also just heard you say a lot of things about, you're working on developing a program that's going to involve therapy and a lot of other things. And the public is thinking, well, you also have a public job to do about serving the students. So I had asked, can you take care of yourself and serve the students at the same time? I know when we had another public servant, Ryan Rauschenberger, he had some drinking problems while on the job. He took a leave of absence. Is that what it's going to be from you? Are you going to be able to take a leave of absence? How can you say that your life has become unmanageable and also ask voters to say, hey, give me another 4 years as superintendent?
Well, that's where the evaluation came in. And that's why, when people were reaching out to me just saying, what are your next steps? What are you going to do? Are you going to be able to stay in office? That's what the evaluation truly uncovered and revealed. Had they said I needed residential treatment, I need to go away, I need to live there, and I need to spend 28 days. They didn't say that. They said you need to have a structured outpatient program that can be done in your community outside of work hours. So when I say my two priorities, currently, Rob, I work anywhere between 60 and 70 hours a week on my DPI job through my choice. I believe, I will be able to come to work Monday through Friday, keep all of my commitments that are work-related commitments during the day, and even sometimes on the evenings if I have to travel to visit schools or do whatever it might be. But for the next 6 weeks or so, I might need to scale back from 70 hours a week back to maybe 50 or 45 hours a week. And with that, the program that I'm talking about meets in the evenings, Monday nights and Tuesday nights and Thursday nights within our community in that group setting for both one-on-one counseling and the group setting counseling. And so with that, I'll be able to spend those hours not only engaged in the network of informal support, but actually the formal counseling, and still be able to give well over 40 hours a week. When I was becoming unmanageable, I'll have to tell you that there's a lot of things that I was taking on that probably weren't within, that someone else could do. I think the program will help me be able to discern what is really my responsibility for K-12 education and the efforts that we're working on, and what can maybe someone else take on. Because just because I can't doesn't mean I should every time to meet my priority needs of health and well-being and students K-12 and their families and teachers.
When you said your life was becoming unmanageable, did you have other incidents of drinking, which you now maybe consider problem drinking leading up to your arrest? I mean, how long has this been going on?
Well, so I think, very good question. I think when I talk about my life has become unmanageable, what I was thinking of at that, as I was replaying that tape, was the tape of, obviously, Wednesday evening, when I left the restaurant after having drinking alcohol and driving home. And so that was my signal. It's like, okay, so now suddenly I'm dealing with a lot of other issues. And so that's not manageable. And that's not the way that I choose as a committed professional to have what I would describe as a manageable life. But I think, as we talk about all the other occurrences, and if you've seen them, I've seen them, they're out there about the incidences over a decade. I think any one of those in isolation for a period in time would say, yep, my life became unmanageable. But again, as I said, when you connect that with all of the other things that might indicate that it was manageable, that's what I need to figure out in this is this chronic? Are these isolated incidences? And if they are, without going to the chronic illness, what are the triggers that are causing those to happen? And how do you maintain those? So even though they may be few and far between of 5-year incidences, I don't want those to ever happen in my life.
To talk about other incidences, obviously a couple of years ago, there was another incident, high profile, where you were arrested. Charges ultimately dropped, but it stemmed from a domestic incident with you and somebody you were dating at the time. While that story was out there, there was another incident was revealed down in Florida. I'm forgetting now about the incident in Florida, and I should have reviewed the report before we interviewed, but it seems to my recollection that both of, I know certainly the Bismarck domestic violence issue were related to alcohol. Are these some of the incidences that you're talking about maybe in your life where you're reflecting on now and saying, maybe this is part of the problem?
Yes, absolutely. So that incident, 5 years ago and, 6 years ago and then 5 years ago, obviously not a healthy relationship. And so I'll just leave it at that. And now this incident again.
What happened that night that you got arrested? Can you walk us through what led up to the point where you found yourself being placed under arrest?
Absolutely. After work on Wednesday afternoon, I met a group of colleagues that I work regularly with. We met at the East 40 to get something to eat and to socialize. And during that course of that evening, I got there between 5:15 and 5:30. Met with this group that I work with, and we covered a whole, wide range of topics. We talked about, social issues, families, how everybody's doing. We talked about politics. We talked about some work-related issues. And then at between 9:15 and 9:30, I left. I had 3 craft beers, and granted, that doesn't maybe sound like a lot, but let's just acknowledge I'm 109 pounds, and that probably goes a long way. As I was leaving the restaurant to go home, I placed a phone call to talk about some other issues, and really, I think that just led to an extremely poor decision. So in addition to not really processing what I should be doing, the decisions that I should be making, I kind of immediately vaulted into the next thing on my list that I needed to address and focus on, and got in my vehicle, drove, talked on the phone, drove while after drinking alcohol, was on my way home. And from what the officer shared with me, he said I had crossed the fog line 2 times and had come close to the center line. And for that reason, he had pulled me over and administered the field sobriety test.
Well, why did you refuse? The reports I read said that you refused the sobriety test. Why did you refuse?
Oh, I didn't refuse the field sobriety test. What I did, I engaged with those. Okay. And so I think maybe you're talking about the chemical test or the breathalyzer.
Right. Yes.
Oh, okay. So that is, in hindsight, something that I wish I wouldn't have refused. But here's what it went. So I had never been in a situation like this before. I'd never been pulled over for, suspicion of DUI. I never planned to ever be in this situation before. And I just simply didn't know. I didn't know that there was a card that was read to you for right of refusal. I didn't know that it was a thing. I honestly, truly didn't even know that it existed. I'm not a legal expert, and it was, not something that I followed through any legislative session or during its implementation. I had really no need to. So in any case, when I was in that situation and that card was read to me, I didn't understand. I didn't know what it was, as I said, and was really confused about what it even said. I asked the officer to read it again. And so trying to process that, the only thing that I could assimilate it to or become that was even familiar that I could attach it to was, the Miranda rights that we all know and hear about on every TV detective show. So I was like, oh, okay, the right to remain silent. So I knew that in most situations that was the right thing to do in that situation. So I said no. And the officer raised his eyebrows and kind of gave me some sort of indication that wasn't, he was surprised or shocked. And so I immediately said, was that right? Should I do this? Would it be better if I did do this? And he said, I can't tell you what to do. I can't answer that. He said, all I can do is read the card. And so then I asked him to read the card again, and he read the card, and still being, really confused and not understanding what that meant or what the ramifications were, I said no again. As I started, I would have, in hindsight, I would have completely and totally done the breathalyzer, and I think it would have been obviously in my best interest to do that. And I think, obviously I would have broken, what might be a second charge. I just didn't know.
At this point,
didn't know about it.
At this point, my understanding is you've been cited for care required, or a traffic citation related to, I think it's called care required. And I believe the state's attorney is still considering further charges. I guess I can't speak. I don't know what those are. Do you feel like you drove drunk?
Well, here's what I know. I absolutely 100% know that it was a poor decision, regardless of how much alcohol I drove, or how much alcohol I consumed, or what my blood alcohol level may have been or may not have been. Wrong decision to make a decision to drive after drinking alcohol at all. That is something I know and believe. and confirmed and committed to. So I will say that decision that I made was wrong. Whether I was legally drunk or not, I don't know. We're never the best. I just drove after having alcohol, and that wasn't a good decision.
Do you feel like did you feel like alcohol may have contributed to your confusion over the officers, asking you to take a breathalyzer?
I don't think so. No, I didn't even know that it was a choice. I just thought there was a process. I didn't know there was a right to refusal. Now knowing what I know now, I understand that there had been a lot of conversation. There's been lots of discussion about that whole right to refusal and the administrative side of things, and didn't even know it existed. Didn't know, just really, there was no confusion. It was just lack of knowledge about this as an opportunity, or what the expectations of the confinements. I just didn't know. So not confusion about not understanding, but just didn't know what the best course of action would be, or that there would be a charge or an administrative consequences.
What do you say to North Dakota State? I mean, there's a lot of legalese around drunk driving statutes. Zooming out from a lot of that, what North Dakota students are reading, or maybe hearing their parents talking about, or seeing on television or hearing on the radio, is that their superintendent was arrested on suspicion of drunk driving. They've now heard you yourself admit that it was a bad decision. You got behind the wheel after you drank. You drank 3 beers. Setting aside, what do you tell those students? What is your message to those students who are saying, "Hey, what happened here?"
I think it's really important, and my statement says this clear, that I understand that need to be an example for students. It is a responsibility that I think is incredibly important. And what I would say to them, and what I'm hopefully demonstrating in my actions, is that you don't shy away from that. You don't hide. You don't quit. You don't go away. You don't let yourself be swallowed up in the shame of it. What we tell all students, whether they're elementary, middle, or high school, and what we tell all young adults is, or what I expect as educators, we tell all adults, is that when you make a mistake, you don't quit and you don't hide. What you need to do when you make a mistake is you need to get yourself back up again. You need to make sure that you are doing what you need to do to never make that mistake again, and make better decisions in the future. You make restitution to those that you've harmed, and you accept the consequences. So I would say to all of those young people that are watching me, to see that, to say that don't say that it's someone else's fault. It's your responsibility. You need to learn from it. You need to correct it. You need to do what you need to do to make sure it never happens again. And you need to make restitution and amends to those people that were harmed by it. There have been young people that have reached out to me, young women in particular, high school and a little bit older, that have said, they're achievers, and no one else in their community knows that they're struggling, or that they do these types of things. And they just want me to know that it's important for them to see me not quitting, that it gives them hope. There's also been people that have reached out to me, moms in particular, that said they sometimes don't make the best decisions. And I know this from traveling across the state and visiting our schools like I do so often. There are boys and girls in our schools, in every school in our state, who have someone in their life that they love, whether it's their mom or their dad or their uncle or a brother or sister that are struggling with this. And I want them to know that this shouldn't be they can't let themselves get swallowed up in shame and embarrassment and let that control them. There's no shame to be had for their mom or for their dad. They're good people. They need to make sure that they know that there's the right way to handle things and the wrong way to handle things. But shame is part of the problem that gets those moms, those dads, those young ladies, those young men into this situation in the first place. So that's part of what I'm trying to do. It is so important to make sure that you follow the rules and that you follow the laws in adults' cases. But when you break a rule in school or you break a law in life, that you have to make sure that you're taking responsibility, and then you're doing whatever you have to do to make sure that you don't make that mistake or break that law or break that rule again.
In North Dakota, if a student gets caught drinking, whether it's drinking and driving or just, the fact that when you're under the age of 21, you just flat out can't possess or consume alcohol. When these students get caught, there are serious consequences, potentially life-altering consequences for them that are meted out from the schools that you oversee. A lot of times they'll lose the ability to participate in sports, which may impact, any potential scholarships they have. They lose the ability to participate in other extracurricular activities. They may lose out on, say, like a prom or a homecoming. They may get suspended from school. Those are serious consequences. Are you facing the same level of consequences, do you feel? Because this happened, and obviously there's been a lot of negative publicity, and I'm sure you feel very bad about it. You've been cited for care required. There may be more charges coming, but you're also asking the voters to reelect you. Why shouldn't the voters act like a school would and suspend you from your job?
Well, that's a good and fair question. One of the things that we really choose, and when we spend a lot of time and opportunity, or time and attention and resources in our schools, and I can't specifically speak to the North Dakota High School Activities Association. They hire their own director. They have their own president and board that dictates the extracurriculars. But to the general sense of how school districts and school buildings focus on this issue of alcohol and violation of alcohol possession and consumption, I do know that the majority of our resources and the majority of our time and attention is based on prevention. And then once there is a violation, it is far less on punitive, as we do in most things. We, as an education system, are far less focused on punitive, consequential measures than we are in support and help and rehabilitation, and a word that is used often in our schools at elementary, middle, and high school, restitution and restorative justice. So we really, truly aren't about punitive, and that's the way that I truly believe that our system needs to be, particularly for our students K to 12. It needs to be about restorative justice and building up, rather than the focus of punitive consequences.
So what's your restitution for this?
Well, to be clear, and I think it's something that we haven't talked about yet, and you haven't asked me the question bluntly and directly, so I will just give you the answer. My plans are clearly and unequivocally to plead guilty and accept full responsibility for my actions and all consequences that go with that. I've retained an attorney to help me with that endeavor, and that's what I intend to do.
Do you feel there are some people, and I feel like this question is a little bit unfair, but because I posted yesterday on my social media, so I'm going to have the superintendent on. What do you want me to ask her? And I had a lot of people saying, suggesting that you're getting off light somehow. I think the question's unfair because the process is still unfolding. I don't think people realize sometimes that justice does not happen immediately. You don't just, go straight down to the jail and then straight in before a judge. It's a slow process. And we don't know what the consequences are going to be for you just yet. A lot of that is out of your control, and I can't imagine that you certainly have the answers for it. But to people who are saying that they feel like you're getting off light so far, what's your answer to them?
Well, I guess I would reiterate what you've just said. I don't know what light is compared to anything else, because I don't know what the consequences will be. Again, not very familiar with the whole court system, especially in matters, particularly relating to this. But from what I know from my attorney is that, generally speaking, it on average can take the Burleigh County State's Attorney anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks to review a case and file charges. And so that's kind of where we're at. But when those charges are filed, I've asked my attorney to plead my guilty plea, to file my guilty plea and accept full responsibility and consequences for whatever the court system decides. Again, part of this journey and part of what I know that I know needs to be part of me focusing on my health and well-being is to not really get into other people's 9 acres, as they say, and to not get into other people's heads and assume that I'm going to be able to answer for them of what they can or should do. Nor can I get into other people's, I don't know what other people's experiences have been with this. This is my first experience with it. And so I don't know what the consequences will be. I don't know what anything will be. I just know that for me, I will accept whatever it is that is deemed appropriate for me, and do that with the responsibility and the humility and the dignity, and move on from there with the grace, as I said, that I need to get back up and take on my life, with the commitment and joy, and the renewed, even greater intention and focus on serving North Dakota students and their families with the passion and dedication that I have always had my entire career. So I don't know what to say to that, because I'm not sure what other people's experiences are, and I just need to focus on making sure that I am accepting the consequences that are given to me. I was very surprised as I've learned more about this. I was very surprised to learn the other day that there are 7,000 DUI arrests every year in North Dakota alone, and that like 25% of all of our arrests in the state are DUI arrests. So just learning a whole new level about this, that's a whole other conversation about why that is, or what we need to do, or what I can do to contribute to making sure that number gets reduced in order, in the role that I can play within staying in my lane on K-12 education. But I just all I can say, all I can speak to and take responsibility for is me right now. And that's a lot. That's what I need to do. And that's what I will do.
Are you going to continue drinking alcohol? Have you made a decision about that yet?
Well, I will say to you that it is not something that is part of my life at this point. I don't want it. I don't need it. And, the beer that I had on Wednesday evening has been the last beer that I've had since, and I have no desire. And it just, I have come to learn, and there's been so many people that have reached out to me in the last 7 days that have shared with me their own personal experiences and how life is, and again, I'm staying away from identifying that, to not take away from that community, that courageous community that is fighting chronic disease of alcoholism that is lifelong. This is not what I'm saying. For me, it doesn't have a place in my life. It doesn't have a place in my life.
Last question. There was and it made some headlines. You immediately after the arrest, you attended a Republican fundraiser at which there were some wine bottles that had your name on them that were signed. Can you just explain how that? A lot of people have been talking about that. Can you tell me a little bit about how that came to be?
Sure, absolutely. So last fall, quite some time ago, months ago, I was invited to speak as the keynote speaker at the District 12 and 29 Republican Lincoln Day dinner. Abraham Lincoln is the founder of our Republican Party. I was honored and very honored and excited to be invited to be the keynote speaker and accepted. And when this incident happened on Wednesday, I called the executive leadership team on Thursday morning and offered to excuse myself and help them find another speaker that would be able to give that address, and talk to them about that. And they said, no, we want you to be our speaker. We've asked you, we've selected you. We truly want, you to be the one. And I was like, okay. So then I was committed to the commitment that I had made, and decided and went to Jamestown to give that keynote. When I arrived, the person that was in charge of the auction items, it was tradition for them to have the auction, asked me to come to where the auction items were. He wanted me to do something. And so it was unbeknownst to me. I had no idea that this was part of the evening. And he shared with me the specially labeled bottles of the wine that they had made, said it was tradition. They had done it for Hoven and Kramer and Dalrymple. And I have to say, my body language was like, I'm not sure if that's a good idea. And then we had that conversation, and he said, well, it's a big part of our fundraiser. He said, all we want you to do is sign it. And so there's a lot of there's a lot of people saying, well, you should have known, and I wouldn't have made that decision, and it was a bad decision. And I understand that. And again, it's an easy conversation for other people to have. And I believe that many of them would have said that. For me, here's what was running through my mind, and it was my mother's voice. My mother, would constantly say, when you're a guest in someone's home, or when you are a guest, it's not for you as a guest to tell people what they can or can't do, or should or shouldn't do. And as a guest, you should not tell them, as their guest, you should not be so disrespectful to tell them what to do or not to do, and to ask, to be a good guest. And so that's what I did. And, they reaffirmed, it's like, we're not, all we're asking you to do is sign it. And so I made that decision. Was it a decision that others would make? I don't know. I can't get into their minds or their hearts or their beliefs. Is it something that I did? Yes, I have to own that too. Would I do it again? I would probably have a longer conversation, a greater conversation with more people about it, being as respectful as I possibly could as a guest that had been invited to speak at their event.
I mean, they weren't asking you to drink the wine. Other people drink wine. Lots of people use alcohol responsibly every day. I don't know.
Yeah.
I thought that part of the story was maybe a little silly, but that's my 2 cents. Anything else, Kirsten, before we end this?
I don't think so. I think I will probably just end with something that was part of my statement, but something that I will keep saying every day, one day at a time. I am truly making a commitment that I will work diligently one day at a time to earn back the public's trust and to make sure that I keep my promise and commitment to the state and to the children truly that I serve, the students that, I made a commitment in 2012 that it was my desire, my hope to work and do everything that I could do within my ability to make sure that when we ask the question, how are the children, that all the children are well. We've gotten better, but we're still not there yet. And I really don't want this mistake of mine to undo all the good work that we've begun and all that we've yet to accomplish together for those students and their families and their teachers.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.